From WisPolitics in Madison, you're listening to Capital Chats.
Hello, everybody. This is Kate Morton with WisPolitics, here with the Capital Chats brought to you by Spectrum. Today I'll be sharing an interview with Fair Wisconsin Executive Director Abigail Swetz. We talked a little bit about the group's priorities and goals for this election cycle. Here's what she had to say. All right. Well, thank you, Abigail, for joining me on the podcast today to talk a little bit about the work that Fair Wisconsin is doing. Your group that's focused on the LGBTQ community. And I was just wondering, what are some of the things that Fair Wisconsin PAC is looking for in candidates that the group supports this fall?
Thanks for asking. So Fair Wisconsin PAC is, of course, the PAC of Fair Wisconsin, which is the only statewide LGBTQ plus civil rights and political advocacy organization of our state. And so we find it incredibly important to have a voice in making sure people understand who are going to be the champions for LGBTQ plus Wisconsinites. That's really how we think about it. Are we looking at someone who will be someone who will always vote in support of our community? And that is the number one requirement. You must be someone who not only knows how to talk about us and knows why issues that impact us in the ways they do, because all issues impact everyone in slightly disparate ways. But considering the LGBTQ plus community is under so much attack and so much threat right now from so many different levels of government, most of all, of course, our federal level of government, but recently our own state legislature. It's just so important that the people that we elect are people who understand how every issue impacts an LGBTQ plus community member. And so we're looking for people who are going to be champions for us.
So what would you say are some of the top issues for the group when it comes to supporting Wisconsinites who are LGBTQ?
That's a great question. And it's a little complicated sometimes because I think it's hard to realize how incredibly diverse our own community is. You actually can see it just in our own acronym. It's long because it encompasses so much. And I think that's also the richness of our own community. But I think the most important thing to keep in mind is that we are not an issue. We are human beings who each of us have issues we care about. And it is very true that there are a lot of politicians in this state and across the country and even the world who are trying to make our community into an issue, as opposed to recognizing the fact that we are complex human beings who have needs and wants and rights like anyone else should too. And so then the number one issue of ours, I would say, is to make sure that people understand that we are human beings and not issues ourselves. And so when I'm talking to LGBTQ plus voters and equality voters, people who are our allies and who are our champions in their own spheres of influence, I hear people caring so much about so many of the same topics that anyone would, but again, maybe in sort of with a different lens. For example, housing accessibility, housing affordability, very important for all Wisconsinites. And when you add for an LGBTQ plus person, the fact that we know our non-discrimination statute in Wisconsin does not currently include gender identity as a protected class as it needs to, and we hope to change that in our future legislative sessions. Well, then you know that housing accessibility might have a different layer of a barrier when it comes to someone who's trans. And who am I thinking about as an elected official who would not only help with the affordability aspect, but also make sure that the non-discrimination statute that should also protect me protects everyone else as well. I think it's an example of an issue that is universally something that most people do care about, but we sort of have a different lens to it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Are there any other similar areas like that people might not immediately think of, like that housing aspect?
That's a great question. So, as a policy nerd who spent way too much time in grad school thinking about disparate impacts of policies on different people, I'd say that the LGBTQ plus community has a slightly different impact from every policy. And it's why it's so important that there are organizations like Fair Wisconsin to always make sure that our community is centered when we are thinking about policy. Because in the past session, there were so many bills targeting our community. We really had to focus specifically on making sure those bad bills did not become law, and they didn't. And so thank you for those vetoes, Governor Evers. But in the future, we're hoping to be able to be more proactive when we look at future legislative sessions where hopefully there will be a pro-equality majority. We're hoping to be able to really weigh in on some more diverse policies that aren't only targeting our community or only specifically about our community, but that might impact our community more. For example, funding for mental health. LGBTQ plus youth, we know, are struggling at a greater rate when it comes to mental health challenges than other cisgender or heterosexual peers. That's not because they're LGBTQ plus, it's because of the societal pressures and frankly, the antagonism they're seeing from so many leaders and levels of government. But because we know that as a data point, we know that there needs to be more funding that is supportive and inclusive of our LGBTQ plus youth. So when we're talking about 988 used to have a line that was specifically for LGBTQ plus people and now does not. That's an example, again, of a policy that is universal. 988 is an incredible service for everyone, but that could have a greater impact if we had a more specific LGBTQ plus lens on it.
Yeah, are there any other big priorities you could see trying to pursue if the makeup of the legislature does change in the fall?
Thanks for asking. Our number one legislative priority has been and will continue to be until we get it across the finish line, hopefully this next session, to get gender identity and gender expression explicitly included in the protections of our non-discrimination statute, because that will really be an entryway into some other protections that we know we need. Like, for example, more protections when it comes to healthcare for LGBTQ plus people and specifically trans youth and so on. We know we need to really look at shoring up our parentage rights for LGBTQ plus parents. We know we need to look at making sure that our marriage equality is truly on the books in Wisconsin, as opposed to currently still constitutionally banned. There's so much that we need to do because it has been so long since we've been able to do anything proactive. It's so interesting when you look at Wisconsin history. 1982, we were the first state to include sexual orientation in our non-discrimination statute, which was signed into law. It's as old as I am. We share the same birthday. Signed into law by a Republican governor with the support of so many incredible organizations, including faith communities. And now that was 44 years ago, as I know, since I also just turned 44. We have a lot of time to make up. We were really at the forefront of a lot of this work, and now we need to get back to being at the forefront of it again.
Yeah, another thing I wanted to ask you about is, one of the people that Fair Wisconsin has already endorsed is Jordan Roman, who's running as a primary opponent of Representative Russell Goodwin for the 12th Assembly District. Could you talk a little bit more about why the group decided to endorse him against an incumbent?
Thanks for asking. So Fair Wisconsin PAC's endorsement of Jordan Roman is really, it's because we need to send a clear message that whatever political party you are in, you cannot vote against an LGBTQ plus community. And Russell Goodwin, as a representative in the assembly, voted for a ban on trans athletes in schools. That is a vote against the LGBTQ plus community. And whatever letter you have identifying your political party, you still need to know that the LGBTQ plus community is an important community. You cannot take us for granted. And it is incredibly important that we center our own most marginalized community members when we're thinking about our community's needs. And trans youth are the most under threat of our community. And so we wanted to make sure that people knew that when you are elected to the Wisconsin State Assembly or State Senate or whatever elected position you are in, we want to hold you to account. And that is what we're doing here. We're making sure that people understand that when we say you need to be a champion of the LGBTQ plus community, that means every single vote you need to keep in mind, who is this impacting and will it hurt someone in our community? And that vote did hurt trans kids. And so we need to make sure that Wisconsin knows that Jordan Roman is the right choice for Assembly District 12.
So could the PAC end up endorsing in other primaries this cycle, or maybe you have already at this point?
Great question. We have already endorsed in 2 other primaries right now. We endorsed in Assembly District 8, we endorsed Ishmael Luna, and we endorsed in Assembly District 76, where Dina Nina Martinez Rutherford is poised to become the first trans legislator in Wisconsin's history. So that would be a history-making election, where you look forward to making sure that all 3 of those incredible people, including Jordan Roman, make their way into our assembly, because we really need a strong pro-equality legislature going into this next session.
Yeah, so last cycle there was a lot of political rhetoric and ads targeted at the trans community in particular on issues from, bathroom policies to sports teams. I'm wondering if you anticipate or maybe already seeing a similar trend this cycle.
It was really disappointing to see those ads and to see them come back, some in the Supreme Court races since the 2024 election, where they really made such a loud splash. I wouldn't say a big one, because I think as much as they were just ethically wrong and full of lies, they were also actually identified by people they were aimed at, by Republicans. They were identified in polling as mean-spirited, which I think is true. And they have a really dangerous impact on our community and on eroding our empathy, but they did not necessarily actually turn out votes, which there's also polling to show. And so I think it's really important we have to understand that these ads are wrong, and they are also a complete waste of time and energy when we could be really focusing on things that truly matter to people, as opposed to trying to turn someone like a child who has an identity that they know to be true for themselves, turning that very personal experience into something that's weaponized. I really think that should be disqualifying for a politician.
So how is Fair Wisconsin working to counteract those messages?
That's a great question. So we have actually been working really hard in the past year to develop some trainings for people to understand how to better talk about the truth of trans identity and the truth of the experiences that people live in who are trans and who are non-binary, as opposed to the lies that are in these campaign ads. And I think one of the things that's really important for us all to know is that we always have to center the trans and non-binary experience when we're talking about the attacks on their rights. And also, it is up to everyone to stop those attacks in their tracks. And so one of the things that Fair Wisconsin's been doing is our incredible statewide community organizer has developed these storytelling workshops to teach people how to have conversations in their own spheres of influence when they hear anti-trans dis or misinformation being spread, often accidentally because people are just fed these lies. How do you combat that disinformation without creating any kind of defensiveness or without accidentally lifting the misinformation? Because we know that that's something that's very easy to accidentally do. But instead, meet the person with some empathy and meet them where they're at, but try and move them forward in understanding what kind of impact those lies have, and also how can we better understand the actual situation of trans people in Wisconsin and America. And so we're actually hosting some webinars over the course of the next month. They're available on our website. You can see them under our events tab. And we've been doing this organizing work and workshops with some other organizations across the state, and we'll be holding more and more of those trainings going forward. It's really important for everyone to understand that we all have a role to play when it comes to making sure that these ugly misinformation attacks do not work and are not effective at turning out votes. They were not effective in 2024. Some of the people who ran them won, but that wasn't why. And we need to make sure that they continue to be ineffective.
Yeah, is there anything else before we wrap it up that you just want listeners to know about the work that you're doing?
Oh, thanks for asking. Wow, we do so much. I don't know how to even like encapsulate it a little bit. I guess I'd just say that, you know, I always just end any interview when people give me an opportunity to say something more. I always just want to send a message out to our LGBTQ plus Wisconsinites, and specifically our trans youth. You know, our rights are very much under attack right now, and there are so many of us who are also stepping up and trying to make sure that we wrap you all up in a big hug, and try and prevent any of those attacks from sticking. And so, you know, when people are feeling a little hopeless, I hope it's possible to see that so many of us are really trying very hard to do the work, and we appreciate the support, and we appreciate the ability to have an interview where we get to talk about our work. So thank you so much for asking me on.
All right, everyone, if you would like to learn more about groups like Fair Wisconsin and the upcoming elections, you can head to our website at wispolitics.com. In the meantime, thanks for listening. I'm Kate Morton. You're listening to Wispolitics Capital Chats, brought to you by Spectrum.